Stranger stuff is trash. If you don't like it, get out. Tim grinned wickedly, his face lit by the flames. What's burning before him are children's toys and clothes. They're keepsakes of my son, John. These memories, more precious to me than my life, were being burned in our yard by Tim, almost as if to taunt me. Dark emotions surged within me. Anger and hatred. I won't forgive him. For hurting John, for making a mockery of his death. For my mother-in-law who stole precious time from John. I'll have my revenge. It doesn't matter what happens now. With nothing left to protect, I am invincible. I'll use everything I have to drag both of them to hell. Telling me to leave the house? That was my plan all along. Sure. I answered with a wide smile. It was about 2 weeks after John's passing. I got a call. It was from Tim. I ignored all his calls, as he was a stranger to me now. But as the calls kept coming for a month or two, I suspected something might have happened to them. With a bit of anticipation, I finally picked up. "What's up, Tim? Please, help me!" Tim screamed in a frantic voice. "Mom, she's in trouble!" I smiled faintly. "My name is Michelle. I'm a 33-year-old stay-at-home mom. I'm home." My son John came home carrying his backpack with me. "Welcome back, John. There's pudding in the fridge, you can have one." "What? Just one?" John is 8 years old, but still very much a child and a mama's boy. "The rest is for Grandma to eat. Everyone gets one." Darn, before we moved, they were all mine. Wish we never came to this house. Just as I was about to silence John, a shrill voice rang out from behind. "Michelle! You haven't finished cleaning yet. John! You're supposed to study in your room when you get home. Hurry up!" We froze as my mother-in-law clicked her tongue. Honestly, that's why I was against marrying a divorced woman. And bringing such a poorly raised child too. She went on with her sarcastic remarks towards John and me. I'm divorced, with an ex-husband. John is the child from that marriage. We divorced when John was 3. Due to my ex's infidelity. Since then, I have raised John alone. I worked tirelessly, day and night, for our life together and for John's future. I thought I could handle it because I was young. But then, like a tightly stretched thread snapping, I collapsed. The reason was overwork. I deeply regretted it and felt despair. What should I do now? Work for a living, collapse, then work again. Was this going to be a never-ending cycle? That's when my current husband, Tim, appeared. I met Tim in the hospital where I was admitted. I was shopping with John at the hospital store, and John was throwing a tantrum, wanting to buy some candy. That's when Tim showed up and said, "I'll buy it for you. Which candy do you want?" I tried to stop him, but Tim insisted just this once and bought John the candy. Tim was visiting a friend in the hospital, and on his way back, he happened to stop by the store. I really love kids. I enjoy their playful and joyful moments, but even when they complain or throw tantrums, I find it adorable. I can't help but spoil them. Tim, a seemingly kind man, had completely won over John, who had received candy from him. "Let's meet again." By chance, the next time John visited the hospital, we ran into Tim again at the store. Once more, Tim bought candy for John. After such occurrences repeated, I naturally began to trust Tim. What mother wouldn't feel positive about someone who shows affection to her child? Then, one day, John said, "Hey, can you become my dad? Mom and I are struggling with money." John must have seen Tim, who always bought him candy, as some kind of wealthy hero. I scolded John for his impolite remark, but when I saw Tim smiling calmly at the scene, I found myself noticing him for the first time. A year later, I married Tim. He was 10 years older, but that brought a sense of maturity and security. The surprise was that Tim was actually wealthy. He was an executive in a company started by his grandfather and a candidate for the next president. The company was one of the top manufacturers. I, a divorced woman, had landed in a cushy position. Tim's relatives, especially his mother, seemed to view me in that light. Today, our family began living with my mother-in-law. The reason was Tim's promotion to president following his father's passing. My mother-in-law suggested we support Tim together. There was another reason. She wanted to teach John, the future company successor, various things. Seeing the grand, old mansion, my heart raced with the thought of living there.
Hey, don't just stand there. Michelle, you clean. John, you study. Get to it.
Clapping her hands, my mother-in-law overwhelmed me with anxiety about our future life. At 4 a.m., I was in the kitchen. Last night, my mother-in-law had sternly told me to prepare breakfast at this time. After finishing, I woke her up. Rubbing her sleepy eyes, she came to the kitchen.
How is it?
I asked, presenting the breakfast I made. She crossed her arms and sighed at the sight.
I can't believe it. A cake for breakfast? That's unheard of in this house. You went out of your way to buy it?
I peered at my irritated mother-in-law.
Would you have preferred something else? It's not about preference. The staple food is bread, right? That's the basics.
She looked at me sharply.
I'm sorry. Young people these days, always watching TV and getting brainwashed. Read a book, you'll become ignorant otherwise.
Thank you for teaching me. From now on, I'll prepare bread.
Playing nice won't help.
She pointed at the breakfast.
Remake this, now. What?
I was stunned, and she smirked.
You should be grateful. There's still plenty of time before Tim and John wake up.
Grateful for the time? I hesitated, then asked.
So, you're saying you gave me time to remake the breakfast?
Exactly.
It's obvious for a commoner and a divorcee like you.
She nodded proudly. She had deliberately set the time, expecting me to redo the breakfast.
And the cake, eggs, and salad for 4, you eat it. Don't waste food. What?
She clapped her hands in front of me, impatient at my lack of response.
Hurry up.
I shrank back as she yelled in my ear.
The wife in this house needs to support the family and the employees. I'm teaching you how to do that. Open the fridge and start cooking. I'll make you redo it until you get a suitable breakfast ready.
She screamed in my ear. Overwhelmed by my mother-in-law's outburst, I quickly opened the fridge and started cooking. I haven't had a proper conversation with John lately. He has tutoring after returning home. All arranged by my mother-in-law for his future role in the company. John had no time to play with friends, eat snacks, or relax at home. I repeatedly pleaded with my mother-in-law to give him some free time, but she never listened. One day, while I was cooking dinner, I received a message from Tim.
Yes. I was wondering if you could do that insider thing.
Insider? Confused by the abrupt word, I tilted my head.
Mistake! Delete that message!
Tim's panic gave me an uneasy feeling.
Deleted it.
I replied to Tim but decided not to delete the message for the time being. The term insider rang a bell, and I planned to do a little research later. That night, when Tim returned home in a great mood, he briskly took me to John's room.
John, how did your test go today?
John was studying with his tutor. He stopped and pulled out a test paper larger than usual from his backpack. Tim, full of expectation, was met by John's gloomy face.
Here.
Tim took the test paper, which had a score of 95 points. Without losing his gentle smile, he crumpled the paper.
John. Yes. 95 points. Well, not bad. For an average person. But you're special. A man with the potential to inherit one of the leading companies. You understand what I mean? Well.
John stumbled over his words. Tim's smile vanished, and his eyes widened in anger.
I told you before. You have to be perfect. Our family does not accept anything less than 100 points. If you can't remember something this important, you don't deserve to be in this family. Sorry.
John trembled. I grabbed Tim's arm and pulled him into the hallway.
Hey, you're going too far. John is your son. Our family, right? Does the family need qualifications?
When I confronted him head-on, Tim looked puzzled.
Huh? That's what family is. Each member is fulfilling their role to protect a house that has lasted for generations. Women must be perfect at household chores. Men must be perfect at work to protect the company. If not, they're not considered family. They're useless to the house. They're strangers. Isn't that obvious?
I was speechless. That's not a family. It's like treating someone as a tool.
I can't take it anymore.
John's scream came from the room. When I rushed in, he was throwing pencils and textbooks at the tutor.
I hate studying. I can't remember all this. I'm a bad kid. Dad hates me too.
John was crying and screaming.
John!
I embraced him.
It's okay now, John. It's all going to be okay.
As I comforted my crying son, I made up my mind. I couldn't stay here any longer. I would get a divorce. I had been preparing for it secretly. Divorce would mean a harder life, working from dawn till dusk. But that was inevitable. I am a mother. For my son, any hardship is worth it. I renewed my resolve. But then, something happened to John. He started feeling weak in the mornings and didn't want to go to school. I thought it was fatigue from studying and let him rest. The doctor said it was anemia due to stress and prescribed iron supplements. However, his weakness didn't improve even after a week or two. I took John to a university hospital. After the examination, the doctor told me,
"Your son has leukemia. The weakness and anemia are symptoms, but the local doctor probably didn't suspect it."
My mind went blank.
Also, one more thing. Your son has acute leukemia. It progresses quickly, so he needs to be hospitalized immediately for treatment.
The doctor said with a grim face. It progresses quickly. I didn't want to think about what those words meant. There was no time for divorce preparations. I informed my mother-in-law and Tim about John's condition and told them I would be by his side. My mother-in-law made a disgusted face.
You know, Michelle, it's pretty obvious that John is going to pass away, right? You should prioritize the household chores for the sake of those of us who will continue living.
Mom is right, Michelle. That's your role. To me, they seemed like inhabitants of a different world. I had decided on divorce. Their opinions no longer mattered to me. I packed mine and John's belongings and left the house. I devoted myself to supporting John during his hospitalization. But despite my efforts, he passed away to heaven just 6 months after being admitted. It was a shockingly abrupt and anticlimactic end. Moments before his last breath, John spoke in a frail voice.
"Mom." "What is it, John? What's wrong?"
Surrounded by doctors and nurses, John managed a smile. As if a bright future awaited him.
"When I get discharged, I want to play a lot. Hang out with friends, play games, eat lots of pudding. Mom, is that okay?"
I couldn't stop my tears.
"Of course, John."
His modest dream remained unfulfilled. I was in a daze after John's death, feeling time pass incredibly quickly. Today, I finished John's funeral. I'm home. Returning to the mansion alone, I smelled something burning. In the yard, I found Tim sitting and burning something. It was John's toys and clothes. His keepsakes.
"What are you doing?"
I couldn't comprehend the scene before me. Burning trash. Tim said matter-of-factly.
"That's not trash. That's John's stuff."
Tim chuckled.
"John, huh?" To me, he was a stranger who couldn't fulfill his role in this house.
Tim's face was reddened by the flames. His smile was malevolent.
"Stranger stuff is trash.
If you don't like it, just leave. Seeing his face, I finally understood. Ah, this is his true nature. At the same time, the emotions dulled by John's loss surged within me. Anger and hatred. I won't forgive him. For hurting John, for mocking his death. And my mother-in-law who stole precious time from John. I'll have my revenge. It doesn't matter what happens now. I have nothing left to protect. I'll drag both of them to hell with everything I have. Leave the house? That was my intention from the start. Sure. I answered with a broad smile. I divorced Tim. He himself handed me the divorce papers. Tim probably had been preparing the divorce papers since he realized John wouldn't behave as he wanted. In the end, John and I were just tools in that house. About 2 weeks after John's passing, I kept talking to his photos every day and steadily prepared for my revenge. That's when Tim called me. I ignored all his calls. He was a stranger to me now. But as the calls continued incessantly for a month or two, I had a hunch that something might have happened to them. With a bit of anticipation, I finally answered the call. What's up, Tim?
Please, help me.
Tim cried out in a desperate voice.
Mom, she's in a terrible state.
I relaxed my mouth, careful not to let my true feelings show. What? What happened?
Recently, Mom started acting weirdly. She couldn't speak clearly, went to the hospital, and...
Tim's voice trembled as he informed me.
Mom had a stroke. She's bedridden now after the treatment, and I'm taking care of her at home. I thought about using a caregiving service, but Mom doesn't want to trouble others. But I'm at my limit. I'm exhausted from work, and next week I have a business trip. So...
Tim spoke with a half-hearted voice. Can you come back?
Even if it's just for a short while, we live together after all.
Mom said she's okay with Michelle. I almost laughed at the ridiculousness. My mother-in-law's matter. She probably just wants to use me again. But after a moment, I said,
That's tough. I owe your mother. Now it's my turn to repay the favor.
Thank you, Michelle. Tim sounded like he was crying with joy. I was looking forward to when those tears would turn into tears of sorrow. I returned to Tim's mansion and took care of my bedridden mother-in-law. Here's your breakfast. Bread, fried eggs, and salad. I pushed the bread into my mother-in-law's mouth. She opened her eyes wide in refusal, but being bedridden, she couldn't resist. You can't be picky. Even John could eat bread. I forcefully shoved the bread into her mouth. But she never swallowed it, struggling with her mouth full of bread. Tears in her eyes.
Stop it!
What's that, mother-in-law?
My brain.
She tried to speak with her mouth not working properly.
It's pretty obvious that you're going to die soon.
I smiled faintly. My mother-in-law glared at me resentfully. I clapped my hands loudly in front of her. Hurry up. Swallow what's in your mouth. Don't just sit there. I shouted in her ear. Startled, my mother-in-law spat out the bread. She coughed violently. I picked up the bread from the floor, now covered in dirt, and brought it back to her mouth. No. You're the one who said it, remember? I pushed the bread into her mouth again. You can't waste food. My mother-in-law screamed in a muffled voice. Every day, I fed her. Morning, noon, and night. If she spat out the bread, I put it back in her mouth, and if she spat it out again, back it went. This routine went on for hours. In an environment where no one could help her, my mother-in-law seemed to lose the will to resist, and within a week, she obediently swallowed the meal. She became completely exhausted, now shaking in bed all day. When I appeared, she would let out a scream of fear. A month later, Tim returned from his business trip. As I greeted him at the entrance, his face lit up with a smile upon seeing me.
Thanks, Michelle. It must have been tough taking care of Mom.
I smiled warmly.
It's okay. After all, she is the mother of someone I loved. I thought of it as my duty as a former wife. Michelle! You finally understand.
Tim's eyes welled up as he approached me. But I swiftly avoided him and headed to the living room.
Dinner's ready. Your mother's asleep, so let's eat together. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Nothing beats coming home to a meal after work.
I chuckled at our conversation, almost like that of newlyweds. Just after we said grace, we heard something like a woman's moan.
Oh, looks like your mother woke up.
Tim and I went to her room. My mother-in-law opened her mouth wide upon seeing us.
Let her go.
What's wrong, Mom? Tim leaned close to her bed.
Useless. Get out.
She glared at me. Tim frowned.
What are you saying, Mom? Michelle has been taking care of you all this time, right? Look how clean she's kept your room, you should be thankful. No.
I had thoroughly erased all evidence of feeding her.
Listen, Michelle even cooked dinner for me. She did her duty well. But all you do is lie in bed all day, Mom. You're the useless one here.
Tears welled up in my mother-in-law's eyes. Frustrated that her intentions couldn't be communicated, she started to scream incoherently. The sound was almost deafening.
Shut up. Be quiet.
Tim yelled, red-faced with anger. The two of them started quarreling, and watching this, I quietly smiled behind Tim's back. I left the mansion. While they were arguing, I took the luggage I had packed beforehand and left the house. Of course, Tim called me right away.
Michelle! Why did you leave?
I responded with a tearful voice.
But your mother told me to leave.
I tried so hard to take care of her.
Look, Mom is emotionally unstable. Please, I can't handle it alone.
I'm sorry, I'm just too tired. I really loved your mother. But to see her change like that, it's too painful for me.
Michelle!
Tim seemed to deeply empathize with my lie. He fell silent, deep in thought. Once I sort things out, I'll come back. Is it okay if I keep the keys?
Oh, of course.
Thank you, Tim. I hung up the phone. Half a year later, I visited Tim's mansion. I brought a large garbage bag with me. I went into my mother-in-law's room and rummaged through her dresser. I put her favorite clothes, jewelry, branded items, and luxury goods into the garbage bag. Once done, I opened all the doors and cabinets in the room, grabbing all the items that held memories of my mother-in-law and Tim, stuffing them into the bag. I carried the heavy bag to the yard, dumped its contents on the ground, and lit it with a lighter from my pocket. The smell of burning filled the air, and the precious memories turned to ash in no time. Suddenly, I heard a noise from the entrance. Michelle? Are you there? Tim's weary voice called out. I met him at the entrance.
Welcome back. Sorry, I'm leaving early. I'm just feeling a bit off.
It's okay. I'm struggling too. I never thought Mom would end up like this. Today was my mother-in-law's funeral. After I left, Tim had been taking care of her, but unable to balance it with his job, he had put her in a facility against her will. She rapidly lost weight and started showing depression-like symptoms. Even when Tim visited, she wouldn't even try to speak. My mother-in-law's last days were spent in a facility bed. One morning, the staff found her already having passed away. The cause was presumed to be a recurrence of her stroke, according to the doctor. I comforted Tim by patting his back.
How about some coffee in the garden for a change of scenery?
Thanks, Michelle. Tim said, looking at me with teary eyes. I took his hand and led him to the garden.
What's the smell, huh?
The moment Tim saw the garden, he was dumbfounded by the sight of his mother's belongings being burned to ashes.
Is that a bonfire? Michelle, what are you doing?
Tim asked, half smiling. I had to enlighten the obtuse Tim. I'm burning trash. You can tell if you look closely. All of this, your mother's keepsakes. I said it as if it was the most natural thing.
Trash? What are you talking about? Those are Mom's precious memories. Why would you do this?
Tim was in a frenzy, to which I feigned surprise.
Why get so heated? They're just stranger things. Strangers? Mom was family,
Tim exclaimed, and I tilted my head.
Didn't you say it yourself? Your mother was useless. If she couldn't fulfill her role in the family, she's a stranger, right?
I smiled sweetly.
Strangers' belongings are trash. That's why I burned them.
Tim lunged at me.
Don't mess around. You can't just burn someone's stuff. That's unforgivable. Then why don't you save them? Looks like not everything has burned yet.
Tim's eyes widened in shock, and he impulsively reached into the fire. Likely panicking from the shock. He tried to salvage his mother's keepsakes, but had to retract his hand from the intense heat.
Damn it! Mom's memories, her precious memories.
Tim, with tears and snot running down his face, repeatedly tried to reach into the fire, but to no avail. My mother-in-law's belongings were completely consumed by the flames.
Be careful, Tim.
I doused the remaining ashes with a bucket full of water to extinguish the fire. Seeing the pitiable remains of my mother-in-law's belongings, Tim collapsed.
Why? Why would you do this? You took care of Mom, cooked for me. Yes, all that to gain your trust. Poor your mother, telling the truth but not being believed by her own son. What? Did you do something to Mom?
I didn't do anything. Just took care of her.
She cried with joy when I gave her something to eat.
Cool your head. I threw the remaining water in the bucket over Tim's head. Startled, he stumbled and fell to the ground, possibly twisting his ankle as he groaned in pain. His figure was utterly pitiful.
Such a foolish family running a company, the employees must be suffering. I bet your father and grandfather in heaven are crying. The company might as well collapse.
I threw the bucket at Tim.
My revenge isn't over yet.
I left the mansion, leaving Tim behind. At my new home, I was watching TV. The morning news was on, the announcer cheerfully reporting the weather and horoscope. Suddenly, a breaking news alert interrupted.
Breaking news. The police are.
My phone rang.
Hello?
It was Tim.
You did it, didn't you?
What are you talking about? I feigned ignorance, and Tim shouted in frustration.
The insider trading.
That message Tim had mistakenly sent. It was proof of Tim's wrongdoing. Insider trading is a crime where someone with inside information of a company shares it for unfair stock market gains. I sold Tim's message to a weekly magazine. The journalist thoroughly investigated the company and published the truth. The scandal of a well-known company caused a public uproar. And today, the police finally acted.
You're the one to blame. Running a company but committing crimes. That's none of your business. Besides, do you even have time to call me? Isn't your company in chaos right now? Aren't the police there? Well, yeah.
Tim's words trailed off, and I could somewhat guess the situation.
You're running away, aren't you?
Tim fell silent. Which was answer enough. I sighed heavily.
You said it, didn't you? A man's duty is to do perfect work to protect the company.
I laughed through my nose, loud enough for Tim to hear. Well done, Tim. You've done a great job in the end. I sent him my heartfelt congratulations and hung up the phone. Later, I didn't forget to inform the police about Tim's call. Tim was arrested. He had been insider trading regularly, apparently to maintain relationships with business partners. Since Tim became president, the company's reputation with partners had plummeted. As companies began severing ties, Tim resorted to criminal acts to keep the few remaining partners. Who could have imagined such an end for a company that had lasted for generations? Pathetic. That was the only word I could think of. That night, I was planning my next move. It wasn't enough. This wouldn't bring John peace. He wouldn't forgive me. Lost in these thoughts at my desk, I must have fallen asleep. I found myself in a dream. Standing in an empty space, I felt someone hug me tightly from behind. I immediately turned around.
John.
John looked up at me with a gentle face. I collapsed on the spot.
I'm sorry, John. It's all because I remarried. Because I dreamed of a happy life with the three of us.
John shook his head in my arms.
Mom.
He looked straight at me, smiling.
Thank you.
And with that, I woke up. Tears streaming down my face. Remembering John's face in the dream, I cried my heart out. Time passed. In the morning, I finished getting ready and headed to the entrance. I stared at John's photo propped up there. Accepting John's death wasn't something I could do easily. I heard countless times to move on, to look forward, but none of those words resonated with me. But at least, I wanted to live a life that wouldn't embarrass me in front of John in heaven. And when I see John again, I'll tell him everything I've experienced. The things John couldn't do, the things he wanted to do, I'll experience them for him and tell him all about it.
I'm leaving now, John.
I left the house with a smile. The sky was clear and blue, and the sun shone brightly.